Good morning, everyone. And our thanks to Prakyat for that beautiful song, Kabir Bhajan. This morning you'll hear about the onion, the wonderful example that Sri Ramakrishna uses about peeling the onion to get to the real self within. That will be the basis for the talk this morning. I like to cook, many of you know that, and I'm fascinated with the onion. And it's impossible for me to cut an onion without thinking of Sri Ramakrishna and that example, and wondering how onions grow. They grow from the inside out, or all the layers there at the very beginning. Why do some of them peel off easily? Why do some of them stick together? And these are all elements and aspects of the illustration that Sri Ramakrishna uses that we never think about. Of course, I'll go through some of the standard explanations. This is all about the Panchakosha doctrine. That we hear about this very often, but not in organic terms. We hear about mostly 5 concentric circles, as if they're perfectly separate. We remove one, then the other, then the other, then the other. But onions don't work that way, and people don't work that way. And there's a psychological element to this Panchakosha doctrine that we never talk about, but I think hidden there in Sri Ramakrishna's use of the onion, because I don't believe that he used these examples arbitrarily, that somehow he thought very deeply about these things, or intuitively about these things, so that there's always an important secondary meaning to what the point that he's trying to make. So I'll go through some of the standard things, how we try to get to the real nature of the self by peeling off the different layers and everything, but today, this morning, I want to concentrate on the psychological side of this, which to me is more interesting. We have so many other ways of understanding upadhis and removal of upadhis to get to the nature of the self. But the way that this Panchakosha doctrine explains the layers of the individual, from the subconscious to the conscious, to the sensory, to the physical, and really is a way of understanding the nature of the person, of the human being, more than simply trying to peel everything off and get to the self within. We can understand it in terms of working outward also. So there are many very beautiful ways of understanding this Panchakosha doctrine. So this will be the subject. I thought it would be just today, but it'll continue for next month also. There are many references to this in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I'll read one of them. If a man knows his own self, he knows other beings and God. What is my ego? Is it my hand or foot, flesh or blood, muscles or tendons? Ponder deeply and you will know that there is no such thing as I. As you peel off the skin of an onion, you find it consists only of skin. You cannot find any kernel in it. So on analyzing the ego, it will be found that there is no real entity that you can call I. Such an analysis of the ego convinces one that the ultimate substance is God alone. When egotism drops away, divinity manifests itself. Then again, if one analyzes oneself, one doesn't find any such thing as I. Take an onion, for instance. First of all, you peel off the red outer skin, then you find thick white skins. Peel these off one after another, and you won't find anything inside. So this is that doctrine which we find probably the earliest is the Taittiriya Upanishad, but there's a very long section in the Vivek Chudamani. Those who attended the classes we had some years ago will remember that a good portion, I don't know how much, maybe a quarter of the whole text, deals with the Panchakosha doctrine and gives a very beautiful illustration and explanation of how they work and how this ego sense comes as a result of these different coverings over the self. The doctrine, very briefly, will break down these coverings into 5. We have the Annamaya kosha, the sheath consisting of food, that'll be the physical. Now, after that comes Pranamaya kosha, and this will be, prana means the vital organs, life and everything. One thing we'll notice is that there's no separate sheath for the senses. And this goes back to another, I'll do a little footnote here, another aspect of Indian philosophy is that they like categories, to put things into different, under different headings and everything. But sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes it removes some of the black and white gray areas. Everything is too black and white, and we don't see the sliding in between things. So this relationship between the body and the senses and the mind and everything, they're not so separate and cut off and individual. And as I say, there's nothing exactly for the senses. I'm going to squeeze the senses a little bit into this pranamaya kosha, but at the same time it'll go into the manomaya kosha. So we have so far annamaya kosha. So this is the physical body. Then think of this, again, this onion. So this is the hard outer or brittle type of skin. Then inside we have the pranamaya kosha. Then inside of that manomaya kosha, the mind. And inside of that vijnanamaya kosha, that'll be the intellect. Now I'll go through this a little bit later, but these are not really very separate sheaths, mind and intellect. It's almost as one sheath, and we'll see that this vijnanamaya kosha seems to grow out of the manomaya kosha, rather than I assume that an onion grows, that one grows on top of the other, and one by one by one by one. This seems to grow out of that other sheath. And so vijnanamaya kosha, and then the final one is anandamaya kosha. Now, this also corresponds to the theory of 3 bodies, another type of categorization that we find, that this physical body, stula sharira, this will, usually they'll add this pranamaya kosha, this annamaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, this physical body, and we can say the senses, the life forces, we can see that that belongs to the physical body. At the same time, Swamiji makes a big point that our senses and sense organs are internal. So that means that this pranamaya kosha will also span this annamaya kosha and manomaya kosha. It'll be part of the subtle body from that point of view. So as I say, sometimes these categories don't work so well. That we really, if we wanted to, we could put pranamaya kosha in with the, because we know body and mind. Nowadays we talk about this complex, that they work hand in hand. So at any event, the 2 middle ones, manomaya kosha, vijnanamaya kosha, are called the stula sharira, the subtle body, and this anandamaya kosha, the sheath of bliss, is considered to be the karana sharira, the causal body. This anandamaya kosha it's considered to be the sheath of bliss because it's the closest to the center, and maybe we can say the most transparent, and that'll be the most tender part of the onion. And so it'll be closest to it'll reflect the light of the self more than the others. At the same time, it's characterized by tamas, by darkness, by ignorance, because these 3 bodies will also correspond to 3 states of consciousness, and this will be this state of deep sleep. So in deep sleep, we're not aware of anything external, we're not aware of the workings of the mind, but somehow we're closer to the self at that point. So it's both the sheath of bliss, and it's also characterized by ignorance. But Karana Sharira, it really corresponds to the subconscious mind. Why is it Karana Sharira? Because it's causal. That means that everything that is in our waking state of consciousness has to have a ground, it has to have a place. Where does it go when we go to sleep? Where does it go if we're not thinking about it? We have an experience, and it turns into a memory. If it's an active memory, it's in the Manomaya kosha. If it's not an active memory, then where is it? There has to be a place for it. There has to be some explanation for how when I go to sleep at night and wake up the next morning, I'm the same person. That personality, it's not there when I'm sleeping, at least in deep sleep. When I wake up again, it comes back because it's all there in this Anandamaya kosha, the causal body, Karana Sharira. So this is very briefly the thinking behind this doctrine of the 5 sheaths. It explains how this what we call an individual, all the different aspects and elements of the individual. And the difference between the Manomaya kosha and Vijnanamaya kosha is the same as the difference between the mind and the intellect. Now, the mind sorts things out. So the mind works with the senses. Things will come in from the senses. It'll sort things out. We'll recognize things. We'll understand things and everything. This Vijnanamaya kosha will make decisions. So what is the difference between Manomaya kosha and Vijnanamaya kosha? Not much. They both belong to our mental life. Now this goes back to another type of category that we find in Sankhya. We have 4 things that represent our mental life, we can say. Anybody know the 4? Okay, manas is the first. So manas, we're going to take as mind. This is what I was saying, that we recognize things through the mind. They come through the senses, we recognize them. We can have thoughts, all of that. Then, buddhi. What did buddhi do? It'll analyze things, it'll make decisions, it'll make determinations. Okay, then third one. Chitta. What does chitta do? Memory. We can say memory. Now, chitta is a little confusing because it's also the mind stuff. But in this context, we can say memory. And then the last one, ahankara, is the I, the sense of the ego sense. Now, we'll get to all of this later. I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit, but this is an interesting fact that if we look at the 4 aspects of what they call antakarana, of our internal organ of mind, we find manas, mano, maya, kosha. Okay? Then we find buddhi, this Vijnanamaya kosha. Then we find chitta, Anandamaya kosha. Where's the place for ahankara? It has no kosha of its own. Now, what does Thakur say? If we peel off the onion, we look for the eye, we don't find it. It has no kosha of its own. So it's a sense of I, and where does it come from? And this is another beautiful part of this whole doctrine. It'll come out of the Vijnanamaya kosha. And this is a very nice teaching. We'll get in this Vivek Chudamani. But as I say, I'm really getting ahead of myself here. Let me try to go back and get organized a little bit. So this Manomaya kosha and Vijnanamaya kosha. Yeah, as I say, it's a distinction that doesn't seem to be very important, but the whole distinction between the human race and the animal race, animal kingdom, the whole distinction between small children and grown-ups, between adults and minors, it'll all come down to this Vijnanamaya kosha, and it's a question of maturing, and it's a question of growing out of this Manomaya kosha. Okay, so this in general is Panchakosha doctrine, this Panchakosha Vada doctrine of these 5 different coverings, and It's used in many different ways. In many different ways. This is that psychological way. It's used on this path of vichara. In the path of vichara, we analyze what is my real sense of self-identification. And if I say that I have a sense of existence and being separate from the body, that's equivalent to peeling off that layer of the onion. So I know that my sense of existence is not based entirely on this physical body. Psychologically, it's based on the body to a large extent. My personality, it's so much connected with my physical appearance. But from a metaphysical point of view, existential point of view, I have an existence that is not dependent on this physical body in terms of that's who I am. I know myself as the witness of everything. I know myself as consciousness, as the self. Something, this body is something observable. So that peel off that layer. So this is advichara. Then the senses, peel it off. And then the mind. I'm also the witness of the mind. We never really observe the mind. We observe things that come up into the mind. Thought, feelings, emotions, all of these things we say belong to the mind. We never really see the mind. Anyhow, if we can watch them, then we're separate from them. So this is aviccara. We get rid of that. We get rid of everything. And what do we find after we've peeled off every layer of the onion? We find empty space. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he used that example about searching for the ego. We search for the ego, and we find that there's no real ego anymore. Now, the jnanis will say, we're searching for the self. And we find infinity. We find that empty space, the same within every onion. So they'll say that we find that oneness. So this is that type of vichara. Buddhists, what will they say? We find nothing. There is no self. Huh? There is no self. The Vedantas will say that we found the infinity, purna. One says shunya, the other says purna. There's not much difference. But we have another way of dealing with this. In meditation, what do we do in meditation? We peel away the layers. I sit for meditation, I forget my body. I do this uparati, this pratyahara. I withdraw the mind from the senses, so I'm not connected with the pranamaya kosha. I still the mind. I'm peeling off the manomaya kosha. So we're doing the same thing in meditation. And the last way it can be used is how we try to understand how this indwelling self will peel off this body at the time of death. We'll leave it, and what will go with it. How the subtle body will be separate from the gross body at that time, and how the causal body will be within that subtle body. So it has all of these different types of applications. So I want to take a look at how this human being evolves, how we come into existence with the help of these different koshas. Now we start with annamaya kosha and pranamaya kosha. Every living organism begins with a seed. It has to be fertilized, but a seed or an egg, something like that. So automatically we have to start with annamaya kosha. There has to be some physical thing there. Now, what about pranamaya kosha? What about life? Now, this is a real political issue. When does life begin? We have our pro-abortion, anti-abortion, pro-life, all of these different things. When does life begin? It's not the same question that we're asking here. That's really, if we analyze not even very deeply, if we look just beneath the surface, we find it's a theological question about when the soul enters into the body. We're not going to go into any of that here. We're going to assume that there has to be life even before conception. A seed or an egg has to be a living thing. So the pranamaya kosha has to be there. Now, what about manomaya kosha? Oh, and also with pranamaya kosha, what about the senses? Now we're talking about the embryo, fetus. Everything is very gradual at different stages, at different months. I don't know these things, month by month by month. At a certain month, certain little ears will start to come, The eyes, they may not open at that time, but they'll start to grow. Now, what about sense experience? If the ears are starting to grow a little bit, is there any sense experience? Does the unborn child hear anything? This is a question of how far the sense develops, the ear, and manomaya kosha. If the mind is not there to sort things out, then what is the experience? Now, of course, consciousness has to be there. That's a given. There's no experience without the consciousness at all. But there may be some very vague type of experience, very vague, and it may be equivalent to the different stages in the animal kingdom and even plant life. Maybe it's equivalent to the experience that a plant has, that knows that there's sun and seeks water and things like that. It may be something like that. You know, there's a theory that the fetus evolves, the evolution of the fetus mirrors the evolution of life on this earth. So that there's a stage in one of the months that it seems that the fetus, the embryo, has gills, that it's passing through the stage of the fish. So maybe mentally also, that it'll have that type of experience of the world. We don't know any of these things. But I know that it's fashionable now for people to play music, for the mother to play music before the child is born. They have in something like Bach for babies or different things. I remember when my sister was caring for her first child, she used to do that. Or talk to the children. We have that wonderful story of the Queen Madalasa who kept saying Tattvamasi and everything, and when the sons were born, they became sannyasis and left the world. We don't know how much of this is true, but the development of the senses and mind and everything before birth and right after birth, how they won't be very different. Only one is inside the womb, the other is outside. The experience in the womb, what will it be? Maybe slight feeling of warmth and comfort, maybe something like that. But we really don't know much about these things. So we have this, we can say annamaya kosha. The physical body has to be there. Pranamaya kosha, there has to be life there. And manomaya kosha, there'll be some mind that develops. Of course, they all develop. This is why I say this onion is an organic living thing that grows. So these 5 C's also grow. So the mind will be there to a certain extent. And Vijnanamaya kosha will be absent. And this is the one thing that we won't find, generally speaking, in the animal kingdom. And this is something that develops much later. This we'll see in this Vivek Chudamani that the decisive, the definitive element of this Vijnanamaya kosha is not simply like buddhi making decisions, but reflective thought. So that I know that I am a person. That sense of I, that ego sense. So this is, we were wondering, where does this ego come from? If we don't have a kosha for it, it comes out of that reflective. So that will grow. It comes in human beings much later. Some never get it. And some never become reflective in the sense that they'll really grow up. They remain children. They don't become responsible people. They have it, of course, but not in that higher type of sense. And it happens in a certain period of time, so that there'll be in the very early years of life that we won't have that Vijnanamaya kosha won't happen. Now, what is the experience of the world through these 5 koshas for the newborn? How does the newborn child see the world? If we think, what will be that experience like? I would say that it's pure perception. There's something in the Western philosophical thought called existential phenomenology. I studied this in college. It's a very fascinating field. And they have something called the phenomenological reduction, that we look out and we see things. We see chairs and people and everything, but how much of that is there and how much of that is within me? What is actually present to consciousness in terms of the pure perception? If we analyze it, what will we find? Colors and shapes. Huh? So the child, what is the child? The child doesn't see objects. The child doesn't hear words. The newborn. Huh? Doesn't hear words, doesn't know anything except that some sensory input is there, very pure, because no judgment is made about it, because the mind isn't developed yet. There's no judgment made about that. This manomaya kosha has to be there. Now what about this anandamaya kosha? Every experience that we have, even the small child, perhaps even in the womb, all of that leaves an impression, these samskaras. And because of those impressions from experience, everything that is experienced starts to assimilate. The subconscious, it's not again little separate cubby holes where we put each different experience. Everything is working together, meshing together until what we call a personality is being formed. And likes and dislikes and prejudices and biases, all sorts of things are happening, so that every experience, it's like, you know, they have these computers that can play chess, and every time it loses, it learns why it lost, and the next time it won't make that mistake again until finally you can't possibly beat it. So this is what happens. Every experience, it gets assimilated within our understanding, so that we start to understand and see things, and we start to recognize faces. It's not like every time we have to go through it again. Is this that person? After a while, we become to recognize it. I saw a documentary some years ago, very interesting. I think it was called The Brain. Has anyone seen it? You saw it? Yeah. That there was a man who was blind from birth. He was married, had a family, and the eye doctors found that there was some type of implant that they could do. His optic nerve was fine and everything, that would allow him to see again. So everybody thought how wonderful that, and this man was so excited, wife and children so excited. He'll open his eyes, he'll see the face of his wife that he's never seen, and his children, friends, and everything. So they did it, and it was successful. And he opened his eyes, and what did he see? Shapes and colors. He didn't see people. He didn't see any. He couldn't walk. He couldn't sit. He couldn't recognize the chair. Nothing, because he hadn't had all of that experience, which we take for granted. And how does it all work? This anandamaya kosha, that everything gets stored there. So automatically we fill in all the blanks whenever we see something, that we know what's really there. And we can distinguish between what's given to us in perception and what we're actually seeing. I'll give two interesting examples. Okay, if you look at this little niche area in here, is this all painted the same color, the wall? There's one color, right? Now, from my point of view, I see that this is gray and this is kind of off-white. They're two different colors. If I'm an artist and I'm going to do a painting, there are two different colors. But I see it as one color, because I don't have to analyze, oh, this is a shadow and this is in the light, and it's automatic. We know it. This is Anandamaya Kosha. It's done all that work for us. You look at the statue of Thakur. It's white, 100% white. Now, if you had to do a painting of it, you see all of the shadows have to be done in a dark color. If we saw it as white, we wouldn't be able to make out any features. Take a vase, for example. There's a crystal. It has no color at all. But if you analyze, it's full of color. And done in such a way that we know it's reflecting every light and things behind it, that as soon as we see it, we know that it has no color of its own. So this is how this Anandamaya kosha helps with all of this. It works with the Manomaya kosha so that we can live in the world and we can experience things without analyzing everything. So it's a kind of automatic sorting system that we have. And so this is how these things function and work. Now this Vijnanamaya kosha is a work in progress. This developed at a certain age, and there are, of course, a lot of studies on child psychology that will go through all of these things. At different ages, we have different levels of self-awareness, self-awakening. It's very interesting that they say when a child first learned how to tell a lie, that this is a sign of reaching a certain level, knowing that my thoughts are private, other people won't know, something like that. I remember I had a very interesting conversation with one of my nieces many years ago. We had a friend who had a child who had some developmental problems. And so she knows, she was very young. I wish I could remember how old my niece was, maybe 6 or 7 or 8, something like that. So she asked me, why does he behave like that? Why does he act that way? He would do funny things, and his speech was a little funny and everything. So I thought I thought I was very intelligent. I gave a good answer. I said, well, you know, sometimes you'll get sick in the body or something, you'll have a little cold. He has something like that, a little sick in his mind. So she looked at me and she said, what's a mind? See, and then it dawned on me that at that age, there's no awareness that you even have a mind. You only know external things. So this is the Kathopanishad verse, huh? That why don't we see the self within? From such an early age, the mind is going outward through the senses. No conception even of that. So this mind will develop to a certain point where we start to have a sense of I. Now, do animals have this sense of I? Maybe. We know experiments done with some chimpanzees and apes and things where they can stand in front of a mirror and seem to recognize themselves. Otherwise, we don't know. We more or less assume not. Now look at the Manomaya kosha and Pranamaya kosha of a dog. And the dog's ability to smell things. So this dog has a nose, snout, Annamaya kosha, and the sense of smell is so much more highly developed than we have. It can recognize hundreds of different smells, and this Manomaya kosha, with regard to smell, is more highly developed because it's the mind of the dog that can say, or at least let it know, that this is the scent of a person, this is the scent. Now, if it says this is the scent of a wild animal, and the dog runs away. Now, we don't assume that there's any Vijnanamaya kosha, that the dog thinks, oh, now I'm in danger, I must run, that because there's no sense of I, that it'll be an automatic trigger that there's some danger, so the dog will run away. So the mind can be very highly developed, senses can be highly developed, but this Vijnanamaya kosha is something which seems to be for higher beings. I don't want to say just human beings, because we don't really know too much about other species, but in general, and not just human beings, but at a certain age. So this is something that develops. Now, this goes back to another nice idea that Thakur has. When he talks about the ego, he talks about ripe and unripe. So again, one is with an onion, now this is with fruit. Ripe and unripe. Now, he could have simply said that there's the ego of knowledge, the ego of ignorance, the ego of realization, and the ego of the seeker. But fruit ripens gradually. This slow change. It's not simply ripe or unripe. So this Vijnanamaya kosha, it slowly ripens. And this first stage may be when the small child recognizes that it has an inner life, it can tell a lie. You remember the story about Swamiji, that some young man came to him, and Swamiji is always very tamasik, that he had no energy or enthusiasm about anything. So he asked him, "Can you tell a lie?" And the young man said, "Oh, Swamiji, no, I could never tell a lie." And then he said, "First learn to tell a lie." Now, what does that mean? Not that he wants him to tell a lie exactly, but it means he wants at least reach that stage of self-awareness and where you recognize freedom of will and that you can actually do something. At least learn to do something that way. So this is that one stage, we can say, of ripening. And then we get to the higher stages where we really have some type of self-awareness. And with this comes responsibility. Before we recognize this sense of I, how responsible are we for our actions? There's another big question. It's a legal question also. So we make a distinction between minors and adults. That the minors, they'll have a whole different legal system for them, that they won't be tried as an adult unless they reach a certain age, because there's some feeling that this manomaya kosha is stronger than vijnanamaya kosha. That means manomaya kosha with the anandamaya kosha, that the samskaras are there, and the child, still a child, is following them without that mature ability to analyze and decide, is this the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. So we even make a decision that way. Now, I want to find this verse from the Vivek Chudamani. This, I think, is very, very helpful. This is verse number 186. And this is, as I say, long section on Panchakosha doctrine. And this is explaining specifically the Vijnanamaya Kosha. Vijnanamaya Kosha, this sheath of, we say intellect, but I want to say more reflective knowledge, something like that. Not just making decisions, but some sense of self-awareness. So it says, anadi kaloyam aham swabhava. So this Vijnanamaya Kosha is very of the very nature of I, this ego. And then it says, jivaha samasta vyavahara vodha. So we do all of our actions in the world as a person. This is what makes us people, this Vijnanamaya Kosha. Otherwise, we're like animals. Nothing wrong with animals. I'm not putting animals down. But otherwise, we're just instinctively living, not consciously living. As a Vijnanamaya Kosha, we live consciously and with the awareness that our actions have consequences, the awareness that we have some sense of freedom of will, at least to the extent that we have to claim responsibility for what we do. We at that point, we can't simply say, oh, my samskaras made me do it. My prakriti made me do it. We read in Gita that this may be ultimately true, but I can't say it at that point. I have to take some responsibility that I know deep within that this samskara was pushing me to do this. I really wanted to take that, though it didn't belong to me, but I knew it was wrong, so I didn't do it. So this is that Vijnanamaya Kosha. And this is what jiva, this which makes us a person. So these two things, aham swabhavaha and jiva. And then, so here the Vijnanamaya Kosha is identified with the jiva itself. Now, we may say that all of them together represent the person, which is true. But the sense of being a person, which, as I say, small children don't have, and animals, as far as we know, don't have that sense of being a person, that belongs to this Vijnanamaya Kosha, which I don't think comes along with all of the others. I think this is the one that is almost not a separate sheath, or at least if it is, it grows out of the Manomaya Kosha. So when we analyze how a person matures and grows, we can understand in terms of these things. Now, what's happening with all of this is that everything is finding its place in the Anandamaya Kosha, the subconscious mind. And when we talk about the character and personality, this is not just all of the things that we're aware of and what we think of about ourselves, but all the hidden things. This is why the theory of samskara is so important, that we have personality traits that are there and very hard to get rid of because we've had them over a whole lifetime. So what do we do about these things? The Vijnanamaya Kosha makes us aware of the role of the mind and how whatever we experience and do and think leaves its mark in the Anandamaya Kosha. So we change our patterns of behavior. We actively try to change the samskaras, to replace them, and we do this through our spiritual practice. So this doctrine of this Panchakosha, this gives us a good understanding of how all of these things work. And they allow us to understand how this personality forms, and the role of thought and the role of maturing, and how really an individual, we're not just these five things together, how they're all interacting and working and growing. And I really feel that this is why Thakur, he could have simply said concentric circles, why he used this illustration of the onion, because it's something living and throbbing and growing. That's organic, and everything together. Some of the, you go to peel an onion, some of it comes off easily. Sometimes there's a little membrane connecting the two inside. So the human beings are like that. So there's a Panchakosha doctrine. It has this element to it that it explains the nature of the self. And this ahankara, to me, this is the most interesting, because in the Sankhya system, ahankara is a category that we saw. We had the four. So according to Sankhya, that the sense of I is something structural. It's something part of the mind, of our mental life, that we're almost born with it. I have a sense of I. The doctrine of that we find in Vivek Chudamani, the way it's explained here, is that it comes through the maturing of the mind to the point where we can become self-reflective. We can look at ourselves and have some feeling of this is who I am. Because the ego, it's not a structure, it's not even a solid thing. It's something that's constantly changing. It is nothing but our idea of who we are. It is self-image. It's just an idea. The ego is an idea. It has no substance to it. This is why when Thakur talks about peeling the onion, he's not doing it in the very traditional sense of what is this Atman? Let me get to the bottom of that. He starts out with this idea of what is this ego? And when we get to the bottom, we find that this ego doesn't exist. Now, of course, Sri Ramakrishna is so practical. He says it doesn't exist, but that feeling is there, because his Vijnanamaya Kosha is always functioning. So what do? We have to change this sense of self-identification, and this is Thakur's doctrine of arop kora, that to superimpose some other idea, that instead of being identified with the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha and everything else, then identify with something divine. Feel yourself to be, if anything, the jiva, Vijnanamaya Kosha. Feel yourself to be a jiva, that's okay. We can't get rid of that idea, that I'm an I'm a person. But I have a relationship with God, and that'll be my main form of self-identification. I want to transform. This is the ripening of the ego. See, I was talking about the different stages of ripening. When Thakur talks about the ripe ego, he means a very high state. He means either he uses it in two senses. One, after God realization. Then we live in the world with a completely transformed sense of I. And it can be in a relationship, the child of God, or it can just be I am that. It can be the I of the jnani, it can be the I of the bhakta. The other type of ripe I is the one that we practice. If I say I'm a child of God, then I'm saying it in order to fully believe it and grow into it. Aropkora. That I'm superimposing it, knowing that deep down, this is the ultimate truth. Ultimate truth is that I'm a physical body, I'm a child of my biological parents, but I know myself to be more than that. Even as a jiva, forget about the Atman and Paramatman, even as a jiva, I know that I'm part of that wave, part of that ocean of consciousness. I have that relationship. So once we understand that this ahankara is not a sheath, it's not really a structure of consciousness, it's nothing, it's not vastu, it's not a real thing. We peel off the onion looking for it and it's not there. That it's just an idea of who we are and what our relationship is with the world and everything, and that we can utilize that in order to form this relationship with God, or Atman, the Jivatman, Paramatman, that type of relationship, and that'll be a great help to us in our spiritual life. So I wanted to start out with this topic today on this element, this psychological element, because I don't think that it's given enough importance. We want to find out who we are from a very high spiritual point of view. First, we have to understand who we are from this kind of organic point of view, and understand how the mind works and how the senses work and all of that. And when we look at this Panchakosha doctrine from that point of view, from the point of view of the onion, that grows and develops and everything, and then we'll understand a little better how we go about trying to peel it. So let me stop here with this first session, and next month I'll combine all of the others, we'll probably finish that. Let's sit just for a few minutes, and we can try to mentally peel away the layers of the onion and feel ourselves to exist in a way that doesn't involve this body consciousness and even mind consciousness.